Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. Am I my brother's keeper? Yes, I am. To this day.
Nino Brown Boxing, I'm back in the building. Man, I just watched this PBC podcast, and they had a guest on there, and it was no one other than Keith one-time Thurman. Now, the way that Keith Thurman answered questions, like, I'm not surprised. My biggest takeaway from this, my biggest issue with this is the weak questioning that these guys have for Thurman. In this podcast, they discuss Earl Spence, obviously. They discuss Keith Thurman and his injuries. They discuss Terrence Crawford and stuff like that. And the number one thing that stands out the most is Keith Thurman's ultimate goal. Keith Thurman made it clear that his comeback fight, he wants whatever fight that puts him the closest to fighting a champion. He's also said that he's interested in facing Ugas, but he reminded everyone that his main focus was getting a rematch with Manny Pacquiao before the WBA stripped him. Now, with that being said, I found this to be very interesting. Keith Thurman is continuously saying Ugas' name, but we're hearing a lot of rumors surrounding Errol Spence and Ugas having a fight in the summer. I believe it's June or July. But so when Keith Thurman is asked about Terrence Crawford, you know, he kind of skates around it, saying, like, he gives Terrence Crawford his credit. He acknowledges him as a fighter and his accolades. But when it comes to negotiations, Keith Thurman said that was a thing, but it has come and gone. Now, this is the shit that's weird, because one good question was about Errol Spence saying that he had zero interest in facing Keith Thurman. And Keith Thurman said, well, he doesn't know if Errol is just saying that to get back at him, and he doesn't know how stubborn Errol is when it comes to that. Now, let's be clear. Certain things have been a lot more consistent than others. Errol Spence has made it clear, and he hasn't changed his goal. His goal is to become undisputed. His goal is to clean up his side of the street. Since Keith Thurman doesn't have a belt, he's not something that he needs to clean up. Ugas has that belt now. If Errol Spence and Ugas fights, Keith Thurman is on the outs again. And if Keith Thurman says his ultimate goal is to have a fight that puts him closer to being in the ring with a champion, if Errol has zero interest on fighting you, there's no other belt out there except for the WBO belt held by Terrence Crawford. So it seemed like Keith Thurman is sending a lot of mixed signals. And it would have been a lot better if the guys that's on that podcast would have taken a deeper dive and asked Keith Thurman the actual tough questions. Because I'm trying to figure out, Keith, like, I understand what you're saying is your actual goal, but we're trying to figure out the logical way for you to obtain that. And based off what you're saying, your goal is unobtainable. If Errol Spence has zero interest in facing you, but you know Errol Spence has a goal of becoming undisputed, the only way possible is either A, Ugas beats Errol, which is unlikely to happen, or B, you face Terrence Crawford, beat Terrence Crawford, and face the winner between Errol and Ugas. That's the only thing that makes sense. So it's weird, you know, Thurman, he spoke about his injuries and his comeback and all of that shit. He feels that all the fighters now are somewhat on an even playing field because people have been out the ring for an extended period of time because of COVID. So I'm just interested to see how things go. Now, when it comes to Keith Thurman, I would love to see Keith against Errol. I would love to see Keith against Sean in a rematch. I'm not interested in seeing Keith against Danny. I really wasn't a big fan of that fight. But Terrence Crawford would love to see that. It seems like Keith Thurman is willing to go a roundabout way that doesn't really have the end goal being Errol Spence. He's trying to, like, I don't understand what Keith is trying to do, because they also asked him about Jamal James. Keith Thurman said that he gave his respects to the WBA, but he said ultimately he's not interested in the WBA regular title because it doesn't put him in a position where he can become the actual WBA super champion. So he's not really interested in that route, and he spoke on that he's not that big of a fan of the WBA in that regards, and that's understandable. I understand that. So Keith Thurman, the question still remains: what is your goal? And more importantly, how do you plan on landing a championship fight at 147? Because based off the facts that we know, Errol Spence Jr. does not want to fight you. And it's a safe assumption that Errol Spence Jr. will defeat Ugas and take the WBA super welterweight title. The super WBA welterweight title. You know, the shit is weird. The only remaining title at 147 is Terrence Crawford's belt. So, Keith, the shit's not that complicated. It's time to tell the fans what you actually plan on doing, because the guys that's run this PBC podcast definitely couldn't narrow it down and make it make sense. But that's just my take on it. It's Nino Brown Boxing, and I'm out.